everyone. This is BTerrell, Managing Partner at BTerrell Group. Let's join Chris Fira, who will soon celebrate 20 years helping our clients do more work with less effort as an accounting automation consultant, as he shares best practices in this training webinar entitled Design and Build Financial Reports and Dashboards with Sage Intacct.
In class solution. We may be covering some things that you already know. Please bear with me if that turns out to be the case, but we want to make sure that everyone has gains in understanding for what we're trying to convey. Today's topic again is titled Design and Build Financial Reports and Dashboards with Sage Intacct. I'll be taking the tack that I'm trying to show how to deliver financial results to your stakeholders concisely and without cutting down a single tree. In other words, no printed paper. Our objectives today are to understand the fundamental reporting data architecture. I know that sounds boring, but it's important. Then we want to take a look at the Sage Intacct financial reporting tools to learn how to work with those tools to create new reports and modify existing reports. And then we want to learn how to leverage Sage Intacct dashboards to deliver those reports and other financial data so that users, stakeholders can quickly gain, they can basically have self-service to the information that they need to make decisions. First, let's get a few preliminaries out of the way. Again, we'll be working with Sage Intacct, which is an entirely built for the cloud accounting solution with a 15-year track record of innovation. Intacct is recognized as a visionary by Gartner as best in its class and is a leader in customer satisfaction on G2 Crowd. Intacct is also the first and only preferred provider of the AICPA, as well as a preferred choice of the IFAC. And BTerrell Group has a long track record of helping small to mid-size companies reach their goals using financial automation. With over 60 Sage Intacct implementations, they are the #1 Sage Intacct partner in North Texas. I've been with BTerrell for nearly 20 years now, and again, actively involved in helping those businesses excel with Sage software solutions, and have been working with Sage Intacct for over 5 years. So now that we've got that bit of business out of the way, we need to do a little bit of review of the data architecture so that we understand the objects that we'll be working with. That includes dimensions, whose number and names vary from company to company depending on what the company needs are. And then there are also roll-ups of dimensions we call dimension groups, and rule-based groups that we call dimension structures. And of course, we'll be dealing with general ledger accounts, but in addition to that, there are statistical accounts that are important and account groups, which are roll-ups of accounts and statistical accounts. So first, let's talk about dimensions a bit. What are dimensions exactly? Well, they are transactional tags, if you will, that tell us who was involved, where did the transaction take place, and what product or what service was involved. There are 7 different dimensions included with the core applications, and then there are 3 others that are added with additional modules. Also, users can take advantage of user-defined dimensions if they are needed as an add-on. There are unlimited number of dimensions, in fact, that can be brought to bear in your accounting system. Dimensions are similar to accounts that they are used to tag transactions, and they are hierarchical so that you can have parent-child relationships between the dimensions, and interrelations between dimensions, so that if one is defined, that may limit the choices of others. So let's take a look at how dimension values are assigned really quickly. This is a typical journal entry screen, and we see that on the detail row near the bottom, there is a place to enter a GL account, but there's also additional values: franchise, meal type, and source, which for this hypothetical company are its dimensions. And a franchise has been entered, a meal type has been entered, and now a source for that transaction could be selected as well. And the way that translates to the financial reporting, then, we can use those dimension values in both rows to characterize or drill down on row value or revenue values, or cost values, or whatever they may have to be. Or we can also use them as columns, and we can do both simultaneously. Everybody here understands what a general ledger account is used for, but you may not know what is different about Sage Intacct's GL accounts. Unlike traditional accounting systems that utilize segments to string together long account numbers that identify department and region and company, etc., in those situations I've seen where it takes hundreds of pages to print a chart of accounts. Well, Intacct's chart of accounts reflects only the native account number, and as you can imagine, that's a way shorter chart of accounts. Additionally, Intacct has a separate chart of statistical accounts. Examples might include things like head counts, days in the month, number of shares outstanding, customer counts, etc. And those transactions are also separately entered as statistical journal entries. Instead of debits and credits, we have increases or decreases. And of course, the dimensional aspects are also fully built in, so that we can incorporate those other dimensions when we record statistical journal entries. When it comes time to report, we can utilize those statistical values to roll up for the period on an accumulated basis to date, or even a year to date for every period. So for instance, the number of customers that are that we currently have accumulated right now is a total value, much like a balance sheet total. The number of deals, however, might be based on the number of deals for the period involved. And we can then use those statistics along with our financial currency values to create ratios, calculate averages, etc., as you see there with the average deal line. The other thing that we mentioned earlier was the idea of an account group. And account groups for most financial reports are the basis for the rows that you will see, and they are determined first before we ever build the report, and then selected as the report is built. So for instance, in this case, maybe I'm selecting grant revenue or operating revenue, and it incorporates then all of the GL accounts that are related to grant revenue. If we drill into an account group setup and look at its hierarchy, we can then see that they are can be stacked on top of one another. So we can have an account group called assets that includes current assets as well as other assets, and current assets itself can have members, cash and equivalents, for instance, or short-term investments, are also account groups. So we can have groups of groups. And as we drill into that, we then see that the accounts that make up that each of those individual account groups are also displayed. Okay, so let's stop a moment and talk about dashboards just a bit. Dashboards are a delivery mechanism. They're basically a blank slate that you decide what information should be delivered with it, and who should be able to use it. As such, you need to, because it is a blank slate, it's not a pre-built item per se. There's quite a bit of design and brainstorming that needs to take place at the beginning of the process. Once that design has been determined, then you can quickly realize that dashboard in Intacct by creating the dashboard workspace and adding the components to it. There's some considerations we need to think about. For instance, what are the stakeholders' needs per se? If you're delivering a dashboard to a board member, perhaps you need to include both gap reporting as well as some aspects about the operational performance. If you're delivering dashboards to management, however, there is a much greater need for being able to quickly determine information and that's needed for decision making. So you'll use much smaller reports and perhaps other types of reporting objects to help them glean what they need to know. What KPIs are being calculated currently or have been requested? Every business has slightly different KPIs, and so you will have to understand your stakeholders' needs. That means you necessarily will have to meet with them to determine what those needs are, of course. You'll have to determine what the optimal delivery method. Perhaps in some cases it's a printed page or an email, but in many cases it can be a dashboard which allows the stakeholder to have basically access on their time scale rather than on yours. You need to give some thought to securing your dashboards and reports. Who should have access to those reports as you design them? You need to think about, do you have the underlying data that's needed to support the required reporting? If not, do you need to add dimensions? Do you need to capture additional non-financial or statistical transactions? You may even need an automation to retrieve info from other systems or automate the recording of statistical transactions. And give some consideration to brevity. Does the presentation convey the information crisply and neatly? And how much control do I want to give the user of the dashboard? What filters does that user need to be able to do? These are the typical building blocks that we have to work with. There are what are called performance cards. Those are KPIs that typically are displayed at the top of the dashboard. Don't necessarily have to be, but because they quickly convey information, it's a logical place. We also can incorporate any Intacct report, chart, or graph, and we can also incorporate so-called list views from Intacct, where we basically query records. That could include things like purchase orders that are awaiting approval, or journal entries awaiting approval, or exceptions that according to some filtering criteria that you've identified. You can also include other objects that include like collaborate feeds and external URLs even. This is an example of what a performance card looks like. Every business might have a different idea of what their KPIs are and what those performance cards should look like. And again, these are examples of reports, charts, and graphs that can be incorporated into your dashboards. And list views that include things like maybe your top customer balances or bills that are perhaps past due. When you get it all together, you might build something like this that identifies the KPIs that your business needs and key reports. Notice that these reports are very succinct and quickly consumed by the stakeholder. And of course, graphs and charts are also viable options to quickly convey information. So let's take a look now and see how this actually works in Intacct. I have my Intacct company here, and I'm at the very at the login stage where I'm seeing the home screen. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is navigate to the reporting area. Now, if you're new to reports, and by the way, I am using the beta UI, which at some point either this year or early in 2019 will become the standard user interface. So at BTerrell, we're all trying to get used to using it on a daily basis. Back to reports. We have both a report center where all of the reports are laid out for us, and then we have a distinct financial reporting area that's more geared to building financial reports. And in fact, we see a plus symbol next to the financial reports that allows us to launch a brand new financial report. The first thing that we're presented with in the financial report writer, which is a wizard-based tool, is the name of the report. And I'm going to call mine revenue by location. We're able to choose then whether we want to use a row structure or report structure that's based on GL accounts or one that's based on dimensions like this. Next, going to go to my rows, and I'm asked to select account groups. So this is where we looked previously. We can see that, for instance, if we select the assets account groups, it's going to carry in all of the related other account groups related to assets. In my example, I'm just going to add revenue. Now, revenue is a roll-up of all revenue in my structure. Once I click in OK, I can see that it's brought in all the related sub-account groups as well. And each of these related sub-account groups relate to specific GL accounts. In my example, let's see, let's just add a column first, and then we'll take a look at how this works. And by the way, I think I'm going to enter a date. It's going to be an earlier date just because I know I have data in this demo company for that. And I'm going to go ahead and select a filter. It's indicating that a filter is required here because I have a multi-currency demo company. And so I'm going to pick one entity that happens to be in US dollars for purposes of this exercise. Once we have rows defined, we can add columns. I have in fact, already pre-built. It's added a current month column and an account name column for me. I'm going to alter this just a bit in just a moment, but let's just see if we click the preview button what this will render. Okay, it gives me a breakdown here of revenue between these categories that I had for this period. That's not really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in, for this purpose, really a breakdown of revenue by location. So I'm going to go back to my rows, and I'm going to reduce. I'm going to click the little minus symbol next to revenue so that I've just got one row, and it's changed it to a summary now. And I'm going to click on the pencil here in the level of detail column, and I'm going to check a box that says expand by dimension. This is where the power of dimensions really gives you a lot of flexibility. I can then choose any of these other dimensions then that I might want to evaluate. For instance, line of business is for this company happens to be either direct or channel, or I've got locations, which is what I intended for this exercise. And let's just see what that did to our preview. And as you can see, I've got a much more succinct report already that just gives me each of the locations and the appropriate amount for each. Let's go back to our columns now, and let's make some changes here to our columns. One of the things that I would like to look at is I'd like to look at the quarter, but from the standpoint of each of the months in the quarter. So I'm going to alter this just a bit and look for the current quarter. And I'm going to take that one more step, and I'm going to look for the expand by option, and I'm going to change that expand by to a time period that allows us to expand that out for each month. And I do want to add one more column to this, to the right at least, that gives me the total for the quarter. So I'll just leave that as current quarter and do not expand. Now let's take a look and see what we've got. You can see that I've got each of the 3 months for the quarter and a total. I'm not quite done with this yet. I'd like to also perhaps add a little bit of analysis to this that would show me how things are trended at a glance. And one of the great tools that we can use is something called a spark line. And when we choose a spark line, we can choose what time period we want to expand this out by. And in this case, I'm going to choose expand by month. I might want to change my title just a bit here. Maybe in the second heading, I'm just going to change the header to read trend. Now, if you evaluate this, I can see that I can quickly see which way sales are trending for each of the locations. For instance, in this nondescript location, sales were flat, but then picked up in the latter half of the quarter. And overall, my sales are trending up. So there's a first instance or an example of a visual indicator that you can use that's very dashboard friendly. Let's talk a little bit about the report filters. You saw that I previously designated the location filter just so that we didn't have any currency translation issues. But we have other options as well. The very first option here is the date. I can choose whether I want to prompt the user to enter a date or not on this report, or leave it static like it is. And why would I want to leave it static? But particularly in a dashboard report, you may have a date that you want to publish your financial statements. If they were to look at today or even last month before they were published, they may be incomplete, and your managers might be asking questions then of you as to why things look the way they are. Well, there's a good reason: the closing cycle hadn't completed yet. So for that reason, you may want to take the prompt off and simply designate the as of date as the date of the last published financial statements. You can give them, however, the ability to control what they see, basically to slice and dice some of the data by giving them the option of perhaps changing the business line or other aspects of the report. Permissions are also important in order to secure the reports. You may have certain managers that need to have access to reports for their departments so they can evaluate the expenses, but that you don't want them necessarily seeing other departments, or for instance, maybe the net income, for instance. So you can decide who has permissions to this report and who does not. By default, it's given it to everyone, but if you simply remove that, it will place everybody on the exclusion list, and then you can add specific users, or you can add specific groups of users, and we have none in this example, to the report that can view it and interact with it. I'm going to reverse that just so I don't run into a problem later, but permissions are an important aspect of creating your financial reports. On the next steps area, we have the ability to do other activities with this. Now, of course, all of these activities have to be done after clicking the save button, because so far everything that we've done has not been saved. We're still in the development mode. And by the way, it's a good idea as you preview and you like what you see in your preview to go on and click save as you go along. And that way, if well, let's say the power goes out in the meantime, you haven't lost all of that work to date, and you can always open it back up and pick up where you left off. We can add this report to your favorites list in the report center. We can add this report to an existing dashboard, for instance. Oh, we haven't clicked save yet. It's reminding us we do need to do that. And if I do that, I can pick which particular report or which particular dashboard I want to add it to, and it'll simply add it to the upper left corner of that dashboard, where it may need to be moved around a bit, but that's a quick way to add reports to a dashboard. Custom reports work the same way. You can also set this report up to run on a scheduled basis and be included in a reporting group, which would then allow you to execute the printing of all of the reports in that group. Once you're finished, you would simply click Save and Done. Let's go back and make a modification though. I'm going to keep this report, but I'm going to use the duplicate button to create a new version of the report. And we'll call this revenue by customer. Now close the report on me, which is okay. We can still go back to our list of financial reports and find that report, presumably. Well, looks like I have a couple of them. Okay. And I'm simply going to click the edit button now. So that duplicate function basically allows you to kind of have some version control of your reports, but also to use them as templates for creating new reports. And on this version of the report, I might modify this just a bit. And I would create, rather than on locations, I want to see by locations, by customers, I mean. And for my columns, I want to alter this a bit as well. I'll probably just simply remove these columns. So I have a different goal in mind here. And for this report, more interested in evaluating this month, and I'm not going to expand on this. And I want to see last year, same month. So I'm going to go down to prior year, current month. And I'm going to keep all the default headings as they are, those are okay. And I'm going to add another column to the right. And for this, I would like to do basically a period difference calculation. So I'm going to use keep the reporting period of current month. I'm going to change my heading. In fact, I'll just leave period difference, put no title there. And for this type of column, a new type of visual indicator has been added called a trend indicator, which I think is kind of cool. If I click that, it can then show me then are we up or are we down basically year on year with this sales to this customer on a very quick basis. So I'm going to leave the arrow option, but I've also got triangles and colored dots as options. And let's preview that and see how that looks. Okay, it shows actually that we're down. So I obviously have flipped one little option incorrectly. The period difference really should be a net gain. So let's go back and take a look at that period difference. And I believe that's going to be prior year, current month. My motto is that if at first you don't succeed, okay, still didn't succeed. Or the period. Okay. It's the great thing about the preview is that effectively it lets you keep working on it until you get it right. So the little trend indicator then really shows us really quickly which customers we're winning with and which ones we need to perhaps give some more attention to. All right, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and focus on how we deliver these reports then in dashboards. So we have a separate dashboard menu, and just like every other object, there's a little plus to create a new record or a new dashboard. It shows us, by the way, all of our default dashboards that we've tagged as defaults. These are not all the dashboards. In fact, if we were to click into the dashboard object itself, we would see many more out there that that had been created for other users. They were just not on our dashboard because we haven't tagged it as a default for us. I'm going to click Add, and I'm just going to call this the revenue and gross profit dashboard. And I'll keep the column width or the number of columns at 2, but my options basically are 1, 2, or 3. For a gap reporting dashboard, it may be appropriate to use 1 because that gives you a little bit more flexibility on the width there. But I'm going to pick 2 so I can stack them together just a bit. And both of those will have flexible widths. And I kind of like the color blue, so I'm going to go with that. I do need to apply a filter on this dashboard because of the multi-currency issue that I mentioned before. So, but I do want to check location. And again, I can decide what I want, whether I want the user to have the ability to designate the as of date to be able to go back in time, or change the date and get a different presentation based on the filtering on that date. And it might include line of business as well to filter that further. When I save that, well, let's first of all also touch on permissions really quickly. Just like financial reports, you have the ability to restrict access to either groups of users or individual users. And in this case, I'm just going to click Allow Everyone, and then save. Now I do have to now go find my dashboard, and I think I called it filter this a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to view the components for that dashboard, which right now are going to look pretty empty. But notice across the top, we have all of our filters available. And we also have some other options to clear the filters, or to configure the dashboard, to duplicate it, or even print the dashboard. I'm going to click the plus symbol, one of those controls, to add a component. The component types are listed or grouped into categories. I'm going to pick a report as my first component type, and I have the ability to pick from different types of reports. I'll keep financial reports, and then I can select a particular financial report. I'm going to add revenue from my top 5 customers, and allow dashboard filtering, which means allow the filters at the top of the page to change the behavior of the filtering of that particular report. And I'll save that. It should add that report then directly to, and as I said before, I do need to put a location in here, so I'm going to apply that. And you can see then I've got not only sales by customer, revenue by customer, but I've restricted it to the top 5 revenue producing customers by virtue of using a special dimension structure, which had the rules in place to allow me to do that. I can continue adding objects here. It's my revenue by location. Let's try changing this date. Looks a little better. Oops. I'd add my gross profit by location. And this kind of parallels my revenue by location, so I'm going to slide that over to the right, side by side there. And perhaps I might also want to incorporate something like a chart that shows, let's see, some revenue trend, my line of business. And I can determine where I want that particular object to go. I think maybe I want that to be down here. Okay, so now I've started, my dashboard is starting to take shape. I have some key reports with visual indicators. I have an example of a graph. I could add additional charts that would show me a component breakdown. But what I want to do now is demonstrate how performance cards really really add a lot of value to your dashboards because of their ability to quickly convey information. I could add one simply, first of all, just that would be called revenue for this month. And I'm going to find this account group again comes into play. I'm going to find the account group for revenue. And I could pick any of those sub revenue topics if I chose, but I want to use the current month and then compare that to the prior month. And then for the difference visual indicator, I'm going to use a green arrow if it's up or a red arrow if it's down, and basically show the period difference along with that. So let's save that. And I do have to continue to remind myself to go pick an entity with a location. We have our first performance card that's been added here. It shows that basically it's up month on month of over 10 million, I guess. That's a good increase. Let's add another. Maybe I want to have one that is average revenue per customer. So I have defined a account group that's called average revenue per customer. And let's just take a quick look at that account group. And we can see that this is a different type of an account group. It's actually a formula or a computation where we basically take revenue and we divide it by the customer count. The customer count, of course, being a statistic. And again, we need a location. And we could continue to add key performance cards, key performance indicators by adding performance cards that would be appropriate. And of course, that would be up to you and your company to determine what those KPIs should be. But this example, I think I had customers lost. I actually have month. And maybe instead of an arrow, I'll have either a smiling face or an unhappy face. Yeah, I got to remember to put that location in there. And save. So I'll stop there at this point, but now that I've got, oh, I didn't have any that month. Now that I've got a dashboard starting to take shape, I hopefully have conveyed the power that these dashboards can bring your management and other stakeholders that need to quickly see information. If they wish to do so, they can even print these dashboards out and get a paper copy. But why would they when they can always go back to the well? They can always reproduce it at any time. So going back to, let's see here. At this point, Brian, I wanted to find out if there were any questions that I could answer at this point in time.
You bet. I've got a couple. One question is, one of our attendees is inquiring as to whether or not dashboards are, how are the permissions around dashboards maybe relative to the permissions around reports? Or is there a similar sort of concept?
Well, the concept, the dashboard security looks exactly like report security, but they are separate. So not only do I need to have access to a particular report, I also need to have access to that dashboard as well for me to be able to utilize that. Otherwise, I cannot access. I won't even see the dashboard if I don't have access to it. Additionally, there's another layer in that users can be restricted by location or department. And so if I were to view a dashboard where I had been restricted to a particular location, my dashboard would be filtered so that only that location would appear in my dashboard results.
Okay, good answer. And looks like there's a lot of capability there. Another question that came up is, am I able to distribute a dashboard in any way like we can distribute reports? In other words, reports can be automatically sent on a schedule, but can dashboards be automatically is there some sort of way to automatically inform somebody when a dashboard has been updated or changed?
I don't know of a way that dashboards can be distributed. However, there is a bulletin board, so to speak, where you can make users aware, as well as through Collaborate when financial results have been published. But I think if you're intending to distribute reports via email, the best method is really the process and store and with an email delivery of those reports, because then that would not include performance cards, but could include a group of reports for a particular user.
Okay, and here's another quick question that just came in. An attendee's asking about the availability. Well, the actual question is, can anybody in the company see a dashboard? So it might give you an opportunity to explain how someone accesses a dashboard if they're not a regular accounting user.
Sure. So there are two different types of users in Intacct. There are business users that are actually the ones carrying out the accounting activities, and then there are employee users, which are essentially read-only consumers of that accounting information. And an employee user can run reports. They can drill into reports and see the transactions. They can also access as many dashboards as they want if they have been granted permission to that dashboard. But they do need to have an Intacct user account of one of those two varieties to be able to access information via a dashboard.
Okay, thanks for that answer, and that's actually all of our questions for now. I see that we've got 4 minutes left until the end of the webinar. If there's anything that you can wrap up with in a minute or two, that'll give us a minute or two for additional questions to come in, and if there are none, then I'll let you know that, and we can encourage our attendees to look for an invitation to the next webinar.
Yeah, I think at this point that wraps up what I have prepared to share with you today. And I do want to make sure, Brian, that you mentioned that we do have our quarterly release luncheon coming up next month, where we'll be talking about the new features in the next release of Intacct.